worded in the authorizing legislation again, but doesn't, I mean, it doesn't have to, in that case, be verbatim. So low income is your preference?
That would be my preference unless other
Okay.
people have a reason that they disagree.
Any objection to that? Okay. So we'll make that
Yep.
minor change.
There's a typo in the last line.
All right, we're on study committee process now. Say again, Michael.
There's a typo in the last line. The verb is occurs twice.
Yeah, thank you. And we certainly welcome any like highlighting typos and that sort of thing, but this will be reread by probably our researcher and our director, and we'll have many eyes on this before it goes anywhere. So we will hopefully catch things like that. But thank you, I do appreciate it. And the moment I sent it to you all, I found, at least 2 or 3 typos. So of course, but thank you. Oh, so we lost Representative Handy. Hopefully he'll be back. Oh, there he is. He's on mute, however. So is that it for the introduction section? Okay. Are you back, Representative Handy?
For the moment.
All right, so now the next section is the study committee process. Any feedback, edits?
I do. Underneath the bulleted list in that first paragraph, the second sentence of that paragraph says the study committee learned that the feasibility study was outside the scope of the authorizing legislation. The study chairs, I think, learned that. I did not learn that until October.
We voted on that at that meeting to amend the authorizing legislation to allow for a feasibility study. And so I believe you were at the meeting that time. We had a discussion about it at that November 9th, 2019 meeting.
When we left that meeting, we had agreed to contract somebody to do a feasibility study.
We had agreed to amend the language to allow for you guys to do that because that's what you wanted to do. It's kind of nuancy stuff, but that was what the discussion was surrounded by. And then we subsequently wrote the memos to capture that. Maybe we weren't clear when we explained it back then. We apologize for that.
I mean, if it makes people feel better, I suppose that second sentence could just read, the feasibility study was outside the scope of the authorizing legislation, therefore new legislation would be necessary, and strike the study committee learned that.
I'm comfortable with that. I do just want to point out, Sass, that sentence is subsequent to the first sentence says at the November 19th meeting or November 22nd meeting. So it's describing what happened in the meeting, not what happened before or outside of the meeting. But I'm totally comfortable with Karen, your suggestion. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I appreciate that edit.
Okay, that's what I'll do then. Anything else about the study committee process section? Going once, going twice? Okay, I'm going to move on to section 3, background. I did discover a typo that I used semicolons for a couple of the case studies, but not for one, so I will correct that and be consistent. But we'll clean up stuff like that. Just looking for more substantive comments or edits.
Under background, where like right at the bottom where the
What page are you on, Sass?
on page 3. What, that's the page we're on, right?
Yeah, that's the beginning of background.
Yep. So the beginning of background, that sort of first paragraph, can a sentence be inserted in there that also talks about racial disparities and poverty? I know it's talked about later in the report, but I think it would be important to have it right in the forefront there.
Is the rest of the committee okay with that addition? That's just background anyway. I can do that. Can we move on to findings? Are you still reading through, or? I'll take that as a yes. We can always go back if you need to. So section 4, which begins on page 6. So findings, you know, we try to just do a little kind of language prior to the actual bold statement of finding, just to provide background for how the committee arrived at that finding. But finding number 1 is on page 7 is there is, and I believe this is probably Shanna's language almost verbatim. There's a clear correlation between a guaranteed basic income program and a reduction in poverty. In all of the case studies, there was a positive impact of lifting people out of poverty and creating more financial stability. And then again, some sort of lead-in paragraphs to finding number 2, which is on page 8. Finding number 2 is the study committee finds that the lack of integration and coordination of our safety net programs is a deterrent to those most in need.
I did have an edit suggestion for finding 1 paragraph 2 on page 7. That first sentence where it says can inadvertently produce a harm result, often leaving the recipient and his or her family. If we could change and his and her into their to be more inclusive.
Sure.
And
Right.
I completely agree with that.
Could you just repeat that, Smiley?
The wording there in parentheses is his or her family. So I was suggesting moving it from the binary gender to and more inclusive, using their as a gender neutral.
And Karen and
Yeah.
Deirdre, I know that it's possible that others in the Office of Policy and Legal Analysis when we flag that as a typo, but I actually think it's a really important change.
And I had a recommendation on page 8, which, let me get to it because here we go. Page 8, paragraph 3. Oh, I was really excited to see that the racial disparities were listed in here. And I was just wondering if to like really underline those, there could be a sentence in there where you're listing that like 53% of children from Black families and 40% from Indigenous tribal communities are living in poverty. If you could put a sentence in there that also states what percentage of those folks make up Maine's population, I think it would really kind of drive home what makes that such an incredible disparity.
I can do that unless the whole committee is okay with that.
Kind of along that, I am okay with that also. Earlier in the report, I can't find it, sorry, I'm trying to scan. We had mentioned that just shy of 11% of folk in Maine were poor. I think it'd be really important to bring in that racial disparity number there as well, because we do mention how COVID-19 has highlighted those racial disparities. So just kind of bringing that forward. And really just kind of making sure that it's written in a way that it's put in the same kind of level of importance and not like later on as an after.
Yeah, I think Sass made that comment. I think I'm hoping in whatever language we add, Sass had mentioned that earlier as, making a statement about racial disparities and poverty. So I'm hoping that will address your concerns. Will it,
I guess I'm
Samarali?
suggesting just making sure that we put it.
Yeah.
I guess I'm suggesting that we put it in that space where we talk about like Maine's poverty rate in general to highlight those like nuances of that poverty rate in that area in the beginning of the report. I'll see if I can find exactly where
after that first, or in that first paragraph under background, that's where I was thinking I would put Sass's feedback about including, right up front, a statement about racial disparities and poverty. And so hopefully that will address your comment.
Yeah, my comment was just connecting the racial disparity in the same areas that you're connecting the disparities of poverty, like
Okay.
being cognizant of doing those in the same actual throughout.
Okay. Yep. So I think is that all for findings? Deirdre, did you want to go, since you largely drafted the recommendations piece, do you want to take over now? Okay.
So yeah, beginning on the sort of last part of page 8 starts the recommendation section. I put recommendation 1 and 2 together because they just flow together and it was awkward to write them separately. And so kind of start off with that bold statement just so you can find it easily within the report. And then the text after is just some of the reasoning behind those recommendations and why the committee went in that direction. And I'll stop there if anybody has any comments on recommendation 1 and 2 before I go to 3.
I think it's under 1 and 2. Yeah, it is. On page 10, where we have the kind of like lengthy bulleted list
Yes.
of, can we pull, I'd like to change the word consult from the last bullet point there. Well, 2 things. First of all, I'd like to pull that bullet point right up to the top, because I think if we're not doing this and prioritizing, looking at it through a racial impact lens, then people who are being impacted the most maybe be pushed to the side. And also just want to honor, I think, what Sonali had been really intending to have this say is that we work with them, not just like consult, which I think is a little bit of a distinction. That seems like the difference between making sure that right from go what the work is considering this, as opposed to doing the work and then trying to do damage control by consulting later. And Sonali, feel free to correct me if I'm interpreting that wrong, but I think that's how I understood it from you.
Yeah, I was just hoping we could have some clearer language that makes sure that the consultation doesn't happen after recommendations come from the committee, but maybe before. So that way we're not bringing a like bill that or not we specifically, or like this next committee wouldn't bring a bill forward to that commission in a final state. So that way it's not damage control by those folk, but they're able to actually engage in some of that decision-making process.
So that bullet, just to clarify, because then we could add something else elsewhere, was about the feasibility study itself. So it was saying to contract with the feasibility study, and when writing legislation to describe what you're looking at in the feasibility study, these are the parameters. And it's saying to consult with the commission in that instance to help develop the parameters for the feasibility study to ensure that when they're looking at it, there's no furthering of racial disparities. So, I mean, we can definitely move that, that's not a problem. But then the other thing about consulting with recommendations or working with recommendations, that's different than what this is doing. In this part, we can add it elsewhere if we need to. It's sort of 2 different things there. This isn't just about recommendations of the committee. This is about helping form the parameters of the feasibility study. So when somebody's hired, that study group saying, these are the things we want you to look at in your feasibility study and how we want you to develop it. And this is the important stuff. And so,
thanks for that clarification. That makes so much sense.
I mean, we could still move it around, and we could still definitely add something else about later on, if that committee is formed, or in the first part, maybe under more recommendation 1 in the formation of the committee, that it has at least, the same membership, and we can add a 3rd part to that and say, and also that committee works with this commission in order to look at the big picture. And I think that we can easily do that if that works for everybody.
I think it could help too to maybe take the word additional out of that. So it's like to include parameters as opposed to additional parameters.
Yep. And do we want to move the other piece too within the recommendation 1? So in the formation of the committee to ensure that that committee is directed to work with the commission. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head shakes, so.
Yes. Before we move on through this, I had a second thought on findings, and I don't want to wait till the end and have us all have to go all the way back. I was wondering if we can add a finding about that could lead us to a recommendation about the orientation. We had talked about that at that last meeting, about folks that are coming on to committees and things like that from the civilians and community and things like that, having an orientation to these processes. And even, we had identified that the legislature itself doesn't have an orientation on committee processes and things like that, which I think would have been very helpful to our group, especially for Sass and I, but also in the next ones moving.
I think if it's appropriate, I think that would be a useful finding because, and maybe we could include some language that, either as a finding or as a recommendation that this happen, but a sentence that says something that, the committee discussed that to ensure that the public is truly represented and is a full partner in this work, it's important to make sure that members of the public be oriented to the committee process itself before the committee begins its work. Because I feel like I know it's a little bit unorthodox to have a procedural recommendation, but I think it feeds right into the goals of the committee.
And it is a finding out of our process that we realize that's something we should have for sure. I would love to see it. I think it'd be cool if it was a finding because I feel like it was, but definitely as a recommendation.
And I kind of want to go off that unorthodox feel, a lot of these recommendations about like the gender inclusivity and like racial justice, and this recommendation is about forming an equitable, a more equitable approach to doing this than we've previously.
Okay, so an additional finding and corresponding recommendation. And I don't hear any disagreement, so we will add that.
I'd like to say I think that's very important, but I'm just a little bit concerned that if it's in our report, legislative leadership may not read the report, may not be in front of mine. So what do you think about sending a letter to legislative leadership about orientation and consideration of something in the joint rules that would kind of institutionalize that orientation?
Could we do both?
Oh, I would say both, yes. Senator?
I think that's a great idea. I'm curious, Senator Moore, I wonder what you think about that, but I love the idea of something coming out of this as more equitable representation of the public in committees.
And I think it's across the board on all studies and all committees. It's something that we don't think about because this is what we do. We're on a regular basis. But when we have the public that's there and Sass and some earlier, we didn't even think about that. Well, yeah, you didn't understand the process of how the bills work. I know I had to learn how it worked. So I think that should be I like the idea of the letter, Representative Haney, because then that would be for all study groups or all committees. If they have any out like that, I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll, in addition to adding that finding and recommendation, we'll send a letter, or we'll draft a letter on behalf of the chairs that would go to Legislative Council. And obviously have you review it before it moves on.
Great.
Thank you for that extra work.
Thank you.
So is that it for 1 and 2 and the new additions? Okay, I'll go on to recommendation 3. So again, it's the same format as 1 and 2, putting the recommendation up front and some of the justifications for that specific recommendation follows below. So if anyone has any comments on any of that.
This is Karen Anderson. Can I just say I'm really, really glad for this recommendation. I know it has been part of our conversations throughout, but as someone who in various ways has worked around these issues for 25 plus years here in Maine, I think that it is really important that this is a recommendation of this particular committee. So thank you.
I would like to maybe open us up a little more on the discussion because I was under the impression that when we left yesterday that we had talked about this being a permanent kind of living, moving body and not just like, it's kind of written that it could be either or. I don't know if we could
You muted yourself while you were talking, Smiley.
Of course I did. I was just asking if there was a way that we could tighten this language a little more about a group to look over the safety net programs to really highlight that we think it should be ongoing and not like could be ongoing or maybe intermediate or leaving it.
And this could be my fault. I wasn't clear from the discussion whether there was a final decision that be a permanent commission, but there was some talk about there would at least be some periodic reviews. But if everybody is in agreement that it should be permanent, that like I said, that could be completely me misunderstanding the conversation. I went back and listened and looked at my notes, and I wasn't 100% clear on that. So
That's why I said maybe a small conversation continuing, because I worry that if it's not saying like, yes, this is a need for ongoing, that it could be like done once or maybe like done once every like 15 years or whatever, as opposed to being updated regularly.
I don't know, Karen or Deidre, if you have any insight as far as whether the Audit Program Review Committee looks at programs and their efficiency and effectiveness. I know that's cyclical, but how deep would they go? And would they go as far as looking at each one of these programs, or would it be more of a cursory review of an agency?
are you referring to GOC?
Yes, yes.
I'm not 100% sure, but I don't know if I don't know if they would be looking at this in the manner that you were looking at, because they may be looking at something in DHHS, which could be related to some programs, and then maybe they look at something under Department of Labor that may have some of the other programs. So I think unless they're directed to look at it holistically in this manner, I'm not sure that they would get to what this committee is trying to get to under these circumstances. I'm not 100% sure because I don't do that much with GOC, but that's sort of my understanding. Either they vote to take up something in particular, if they vote to take this up, or when they do certain things, they may be looking at the agencies or things, but not maybe looking at this as a whole piece of the pie. Do you agree, Karen? Is that sort of?
Yeah, it's my understanding the process is that there would be a request made of the Government Oversight Committee to look at a particular program or agency. And then there's a discussion at a work session of GOC. And I don't know if any legislators have been on Government Oversight Committee, but they get many requests. So then they have to vote on what the scope of their work is going to be and choose particular audits or projects. So
what I'm afraid of is that it would be just down to like only one of the programs instead of the overall program. So I think that that's why we need to have that specified, I believe, in our recommendations here, because that's what we're wanting them to do. That's the problem. They're all disjointed. Yeah. And we want it to be looked at as a whole in all of the cases, not just one program here, one program there.
Right. Great. So let's move on.
So everybody's okay with making it permanent, making that clear for the permanent group?
Yeah, if everyone is in agreement, I would suggest that it's permanent and that we could have like maybe every, I don't know if we need to say how often we think that should, convene or whatever, but at least having it say being permanent, I think.
We can fix that. I think that's an easy fix.
Good.
And just for like reference, especially because of people that are not, study stuff is confusing sometimes. And so I think it's helpful to know that for those that aren't legislators, that, when this goes before a committee and they're developing the bills that they report out next session, it would be really great. You can participate in those processes too and sort of get those points across and help maybe work on developing the specifics of how they create the group and some sort of, regularity that it could say in the legislation they meet at least 2 times a year or that sort of thing. And so, once this report gets sent to the legislature and they take it up next session, there'll be a good opportunity for members that participate in this process to participate in the committee process for those bills and help really, because right now these are the broad recommendations, but get down to the nitty-gritty details and exactly how it should look and how it should function.
Thank you.
Is that it on the recs?
On page 11,
Okay.
the last paragraph, can we just change that first sentence so that it says the study committee started to investigate the effectiveness of existing safety net programs?
Is everyone okay with that?
I'm sorry, can you repeat which paragraph that is?
Yep, it's on page 11, down at the bottom where it starts off, it says, as required by section 5 of Resolve 2019, Chapter 82, the study committee investigated the effectiveness of existing safety net programs, and then it goes on to list what programs those are. And I'm asking if we can change that language to started to study the effectiveness, because I think we, due to time constraints, we weren't able to actually thoroughly do that. And, we had to rely a lot on the information that was supplied to us by MEJIP, which was awesome. And due to time constraints, even for them, they didn't have all the information that we needed. Like they didn't even have all the housing programs listed, for instance. So just to be sure that the language that we're putting out is reflective of exactly the work that we did. It's important to me that it says that we started to look at those things.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
And I think it really strengthens that recommendation for that outside entity as well.
Anything else on the recommendations?
There's a restatement of the recommendation on, where is it, page 12. And the language isn't quite the same as in the bolded. So maybe just add,
Okay.
I think there's a clause about access, I think, that was added to the bolded recommendation.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Probably a cutting pasting error or something like that.
And I don't know, maybe this isn't a normal step of the process, but I wanted to ask, is there anything that, like, outside support wise besides that feasibility study, it, like, when we're thinking about, like, Karen and Deirdre, were there things that, we could make in a recommendation that would have made it easier to gather that information, or something that would have made your jobs easier, I'm trying to say, like.
Doesn't sound like there's anything there.
Yeah.
Karen. Karen's looking at me.
Sorry, I don't know if that's a normal question, but I kind of see you as part of this team in a way. Whether or not you're voting, you're giving us extremely vital assistance. So
Yeah, and it makes me think of the Magnolia Mothers Project, who said that they hired an economist to come and like ask questions too. So yeah, anything that would make that easier would be good.
I I think the spirit is amazing, Smarley, and I think this is where having public input to these committees just to raise questions about why we do things the way we do them and how the way things have always been done works or doesn't work is refreshing and like important. I think the challenge about making a recommendation to hire additional staff for this process is it might, as a result, undermine the legislature's willingness to move forward on these recommendations, and say, oh, well, if you can't do it with the existing staff, we're sorry, but we don't have. I mean, I think every conversation in the next legislature is going to be around the budget and budget realities. And I wouldn't want to put in the language something that would create an excuse for people to not act.
I see your point, Senator Bellows. I think there are also other resources that might not be a monetary resource, but like, I don't know what the accesses that they have. So I wasn't sure if there was like an access. I was thinking of like specific reports or, having access to be able to, reach out to folk ahead of time, and having that stuff available. I don't know, I'm just trying to think of that process because I don't know the full process. So I'm trying to think, if there are other things, not just hiring folk, but like, are there other resources in the legislature that could have been given at an earlier time or something else to them? Was my thought, not only hiring.
So, just for some clarity, we're
I
like,
don't know that process though.
yeah, we're a nonpartisan staff office to the legislature. So we, there's a bill that creates a study. We can do some background and prepping ourselves for a study, but we can't really sort of take the reins in doing some things earlier on in the process until we're directed to by the study group, because we're obviously nonpartisan. So we have to sort of follow the lead of the committee. And so, like I said, when we get a study assignment, we may do some research on our own, so we're familiar with the subject matter, and to be familiar when we walk in the room that we have a clue of what's going on. But we can't sort of take up, beginning to gather data and all that sort of stuff, because that would be us putting some sort of our opinion on the way you should be looking at an issue. And so in this instance, nothing can really happen until you all meet and give us some direction of where we should go and what we should do.
Thank you.
So last chance on the recs. Anything else on rec number 3?
I'm not quite sure how to say this out loud, so I'm going to try, and I don't know if it'll be clear, but I'm hoping it is. So I think it makes sense that this other recommendation was like separated out from the first two. And I'm not quite sure how the language would look or if other people would agree with this, but like having those be so separate that they're not connected at all, I'm just a teeny bit worried that if we are recommending looking at whether or not it's economically feasible to institute a program without connecting it to the existing safety net study, it could possibly be used as a reason to say we just can't do this. I hope that makes sense. So I don't know if there's like a sentence or something that could be put in that says that these first two recommendations be informed by the findings of this other look at safety net programs. But if it could be stated, I'm sorry, I'm not clearer, but like, I'm just worried that it could, if we're just saying, can we afford this? Like, as everything stands right now, I can see where people who are not proponents of this would not even consider anything else and just make a lot of.
There could be a timing issue with that though, because if there's a way to do that in a way that works, I'm good, and I would welcome suggestions. I'm just trying to think of it from a practical perspective. If your next session, say you get the bills passed to do both of these things. So to create a new study group to do a feasibility study and create this permanent group that looks at the safety nets, those get enacted. The study group starts their work once everybody's appointed and meetings start, and this other group gets formed and they may be starting their meeting. That study group would be hopefully right from the get-go trying to hire a consultant to do a feasibility study and to begin that process in order to do that. So at least in that perspective, that group probably wouldn't have even gotten to any sort of conclusion by the time you're already hiring your feasibility consultant. However, if this is a 2-year study, maybe they've gotten something done in the first year. So we could maybe make some connection that anything that's done by this group that they share with the study commission before they make their recommendation. It might work in year 2. So if this group gets formed, the permanent group, and they actually get something done in the first year, when you're in year 2 of the study, that might help inform when you're actually making your specific recommendations. But the feasibility part of it, I'm imagining that would be getting started right off if this is enacted, to try to hire somebody and figure that out in the first year. And I'm not sure you would have that whole process done in time to sort of inform the feasibility study, but it may be helpful in the final report stages that you could have there. So you could make something, if everybody's comfortable, under the recommendation 3 that says, you know, create a permanent group. And if that permanent group has any reports that they need to share, that I'm not sure how to do it exactly yet, but I think there was some way to maybe make a connection. I just don't want to make it look like this group has to inform everything that the study group does, because then you're never going to be getting started with being able to hire a contractor to do a feasibility study, because it's going to be a full year, and then you're going to be again under a time crunch getting the feasibility study in the last year of the study and not have time to really look at all the pieces. If that makes sense.
It does make sense and speaks to why I had a hard time figuring out how to actually make the recommendation I'm trying to make. It's like, is there some way to say that at the end point they confer with each other or something like that? I don't
think
know.
we could probably do that into maybe the creation of the study group, and sort of when they're going to make the recommendations, be clear that they should also seek any input from, if a permanent group is created in accordance with recommendation 3, that those 2 groups talk together. I think we could probably put something in there. It'll be a little wishy-washy because it's a group that hasn't been created and another group that might not be created, but we could probably make some sort of point in there that connects that too, I think. And that might work best under the first rec, I think.
Yeah, like
Maybe, go ahead.
Michael.
I was just going to say maybe something could be added to the list of bullet points that would pick up Sass's comment without it actually being in the wording of the recommendation.
The bullet points on page 10, because those speak to the feasibility study again. So you're going to be contracting, I would assume, if this all gets passed, with somebody to do a feasibility study pretty early on, once formed, because that's sort of the thing that you need to get off the ground, is sort of put out a request, look at those requests, get the feasibility study going. And then this other group is maybe just going to start meeting potentially and may not have had thorough conversations. And so it's sort of, I don't know if the timing of that works appropriately, and I don't want to hang up the feasibility study getting started because you're requiring that they consult with this other group who may not even have met by the time you're doing that work. We'll take a shot at it and see. I think we get the general idea, and then we can send that along, and hopefully we capture that question.
Would it be possible maybe to, in recommendation 3, you kind of like a breakdown of like why you make that recommendation, maybe even adding something in there that says about how we struggle talking about the feasibility of basic income due to that like cliff effect and the social safety nets, and just kind of reconnecting that there again in a sentence.
Mhm.
Would that be a solution here?
that makes sense to me, because the way even that I just worded it almost was to suggest that it's just about affordability, but also that interaction I'm really worried about. And just want it somehow articulated in there. Like, I always think it's better for people to have cash in hand. Also, if people lose, if you get a particular amount of cash in hand, but then lose your rental assistance, could be a problem.
I have a logistical question about just how the reports work. So the report will be done and it'll be circulated for this next legislative session. What happens after that? What if one of the recommendations is picked up and not the other two? Or, you know, just for example, is it not circulated again? Does it kind of go into a file somewhere? I'm just curious.
I mean, if it doesn't get, if nothing comes out of it this session, it's not as if the report will be brought up again and redistributed. However, people could still advocate for it with legislators, or legislators themselves, if they're interested and nothing happened this session, could always try to introduce a bill and use the study as support for that contention. But yeah, once this session starts, it won't be like this will be distributed to committees again to take up specifically. And they kind of, you're authorized to report a bill during a certain time frame based on the report. So it would be a different process. So yeah, the report itself, it's sort of a session within the session, but like I said, it could be constituents go to legislators or legislators themselves, or nothing came out of this, I think it's important, and they can then try to introduce a bill and use the study as sort of backup support of this was important, it didn't get done, and we think it should. But yeah, the study itself is sort of a session specific process.
Okay, I just wanted to check. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we get on the Rex. Okay.
Okay, and lastly, any comments on the conclusion?
On page 13, where it's starts talking about poverty, if we can bring that language about the racial disparities back into the conversation about poverty rates.
Yep, so kind of corresponding to the background. Yep.
And I thought the last sentence of the conclusion was really strong, but I would love to add a phrase. So hopes the state will move forward on a better path to reducing poverty and advancing equity in Maine.
Yeah.
I like it.
Okay.
A typo potentially on my end. Earlier this year, the Federal CARES Act is separated as a paragraph for me.
Yeah, I just noticed that. Thank
Little
you.
arrows there, like, oops.
And I was wondering if we could put in conclusion, we did talk about, when we talked about like the COVID-19, we also mentioned and brought up about Maine having, you know, we've reached some of the worst racial disparities in the country, and I think this is an important place that be brought out as well as we're talking. And this is just a thought, and please folks give pushback. It's not technically just about the economic piece, but really highlighting that those racial disparities are not just economic, but also, you know, we had Black folk twice, you know, 20 catch COVID than white folk. So really highlighting that that's like an overall disparity of health and economics, not just economics.
I can do that
I-
unless there's
I
objection.
highlight that because we know that my thought on that personally, just kind of bring it out there, is that, you know, we look at poverty and we talk about how like the stress of poverty causes a public health crisis within itself, and taking that piece into our economic thoughts is really important, you know, when we're talking about like what does reducing poverty have for actual real life impacts. We're talking about like public health impacts as well. So that's my thought. I'm open to anything.
Strongly support that.
Anything else?
I just want to echo Senator Moore and just say it was really wonderful to read this report and see how clearly you had captured our hours of meetings and synthesized the group's consensus. So thank you, Deirdre, and thank you, Karen.
You're welcome. We'll let Professor Howard go. Oh, it's not raising your hand, it's clapping, is it? So in terms of, I guess I don't know, Deirdre, what your thoughts are, but I'm actually hoping that maybe even by the day, tomorrow, you know, we could get these revisions to you, if not certainly on Monday. And then I probably would give you pretty short time frame, like maybe 24 hours to get back to us with any final edits, because we do need to have our director look at it and some other eyes look at it before it goes, you know, to print. So that will take a little time, and I'm hoping, you know, to get this out, you know, even by the end of next week to the printers. So any thoughts on that, Deirdre?
I would just make the point clear that when we send it out for this final review, that, you know, it's just on the things, you know, so no new substance can be added to it. So, you know, if we didn't capture something that you all agreed on, that could be pointed out, or if, you know, you catch a spelling error, but we can't at this point, because we're not having a live discussion, add new substance that wasn't discussed today. So that's just, I think, important. And I don't know, Karen, if we want to take the time to just add the executive summary in at this point and have everybody review that with it, or after, because we're putting in new pieces to sort of, so I don't know if that would delay getting it done tomorrow. It might be more of a Monday thing, or it might not.
Yeah. So that was that. I'm glad you brought that up. So I mean, obviously the report will have a title page, a table of contents, and then an executive summary, which just would be a compressed version of your findings and recommendations. Wouldn't include some of the background, you know, paragraphs and pieces. So that will be included in the report, and then probably just the authorizing legislation and the committee membership list. Everything else, we tend to like to just provide links or, you know, footnotes that people could go to electronically to kind of reduce the size of the report. So there's not a lot of paper, but yeah, I think we can add the executive summary to the final piece we send to committee members. So yeah, it might be more like Monday.
I'm sorry, I don't, maybe this is unexplained, but what's an executive summary?
It's basically a summary of the report. So what it would look like, it would just be kind of a condensed version. I think maybe because I don't know if it would, people may copy and just hand out the executive summary to folks rather than the full report, so that it's kind of like, in a nutshell, these are the findings and recommendations of the study committee. And then, you know, it's usually 2 or 3 pages at most, probably 2 pages. So it's just a summary of the report.
If you'd like to, we could send you a link to like our studies page, and you can look at some of the past reports and just get a feel for it. I'll send it out to members just for those who don't normally, do this process, just to get a feel for what they may look like in a final stage. We have a link to some of our past studies and reports, and you get sort of an idea what it'll look like when it's all put together, as opposed to just piecemeal like you're sort of seeing it now.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And Karen and Deidre, is a vote necessary on this report?
I don't know what your thoughts are, Deirdre. I feel like at the last meeting, it was just kind of a consensus, and no actual votes were taken. And there was an opportunity for folks, if they did not agree, to voice those. So I don't feel like it's necessary at this point. It's really, we were just finalizing it, and the consensus happened at the last meeting. We did add an additional finding, but there was no recommendation. There's no objection to it. So I think we're okay.
I agree. We will have a difference in sort of the footnotes, at least for this meeting, because we wanted to make clear who was present when you agreed on these things, so that it doesn't give the appearance that it was the whole committee, and where not Representative Meyer isn't here that time, it'll just have a footnote on those recommendations that she wasn't present at this work session.
Good.
That's it.
I don't know if this is just a schematics thing for me, but I was under the impression that last meeting we were in agreement for those recommendations and findings that we added today about the orientation.
I'm sorry.
I see your point. Yeah. I guess we could, I think the only difference is Representative Meyer. So maybe we could circle back with her and see if she, I don't know how to, because she's not here.
Senator?
So I know we don't need a vote, but what if we were to take a vote to endorse this report and add the recommendation of the orientation? And then, how committee members, so from a process perspective, committee members are permitted to cast a vote afterward with the committee analyst or clerk. That would sort of create a process for reaching out to Representative Meyer and saying the committee took this vote. Do you add your voice to the vote? We would also need to reach out to, I suppose, it might be overwhelming to Representative Bradstreet and Senator Pouliot, but they would also need to be included on any email invitation to weigh in on that piece. So the other alternative would be with that recommendation, I saw the footnotes that you put in, you could just say, with that recommendation, in the footnotes, these members were present for this recommendation and made this recommendation.
If not everybody's in agreement, though, does that open the door there being pieces added to say,
yeah,
after the vote was taken, members said they didn't agree with this or didn't like this for these reasons, sort of opens up for the minority report piece then to be written into the report. Not that there's anything wrong, but that's just not traditionally the way the reports are, unless people are in the room and sort of expressed it at the time, like, we don't agree. And then we could sort of say, at the meeting, most members in participation, the group agreed, these members felt this wasn't a good idea because of X, Y, Z. We didn't really have that conversation in a public setting. And I'm afraid that process would open the door to having a subsequent conversation potentially that's not in a public setting.
I agree.
So maybe just the footnote.
I'm confused.
Marley?
I'm confused because I thought we agreed to have that in the report last meeting. And it was just something that wasn't in the report and was like a flag to add in.
I do remember you discussing the orientation and everybody saying it's a great idea. I guess I just didn't realize it was a specific recommendation or finding of the report, because not that anything's wrong with it. It's just it doesn't sort of fit in with the what the study is looking at. It's a more of a general legislative functioning
Right.
so I think maybe that's why we didn't think it was actually part of the study commission's report on basic income, because it's a broader level. But yeah, you did. I mean, I think we could probably get away with saying, I do remember specifically that we talked about that it was a great idea to have orientation. Everybody thought it was a good idea, and maybe just making sure Representative Meyer is fine with that being a finding and a recommendation. Since she read the report, she was there at the last meeting and didn't object to that concept. I think that would be fine. Do you agree, Karen, or do you?
Yeah, that's fine. In our email, with the final draft of the report, I can highlight it just to say it was articulated at the last meeting. However, staff did not explicitly include it as a finding and recommendation. And so the committee discussed, kind of bringing it up to that level at this final meeting, just to make sure that Representative Meyer in particular is okay with it. Anything else?
Okay, last chance. Well, I just like to thank all of you. I have learned so much from each and every one of you. My only wish as I would be returning to Augusta to help shepherd some of this through. So thank you for your participation. Your service is highly valued, and I really want you to know that. So thank you. Senator Moore, you have some comments?
Just to say, this has been a very interesting study group as it is, or being part of it. When I was first asked to be a part of it, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, where do we even start? And so I realized that it's huge. It's very, very big. And I'm glad the recommendation is for us to have this feasibility study. I think it's more than just saying, okay, let's just do this. I think it's important that we have the study and that we truly take it into be the seriousness of the situation itself. So I appreciate everybody's help and working with the committee and understanding it, because it is a lot to learn when you're part of a study group if you haven't been in the legislature. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Bellows, parting thoughts?
I just want to add my thanks, in addition to thanking the staff, just thanking every member for your really active participation. And Representative Handy, you said it best. I learned a lot during this process, and it's always a joy to be part of something where you feel like you're learning.
Absolutely. Anything else from anyone? Again, thank you, Deidre and Karen. You've been outstanding, and I'm happy to write your boss and give you a strong recommendation for staffing only groups that are like this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll be in touch soon.
Thank you. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Moved by Senator Moore, second by
Seconded.
Senator Bell.
Bye.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much. You've done a great service for the state. Appreciate it. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Everybody. Bye.